everybody, unless of course you're watching this video in the evening, in that case good evening, and you are watching Time Travel TV, and today we're going to talk about the Cold War. So called because it was so cold. No, just my little joke. It was actually called that because no fighting ever broke out, although some fighting did break out, although we'll talk about that in a bit later. Anyway, so the Cold War was basically a war of ideology, the West versus the East, the capitalist versus the communist. And basically, it broke out because of loads of mistrust. The West didn't trust the East because they saw the East trying to expand their sphere of influence, and to be honest, they were. And the East didn't trust the West because they thought they were trying to expand their sphere of influence, but to be honest, they were. So none of them were paranoid because they all had good reason to be paranoid, because both of them wanted not to take over the world. That might be a bit drastic, but both of them wanted to, well, you know, become out on top, if you will. So when we refer to the West, we often refer to it as, we mainly look at America, but there was other countries involved. We mainly look at the NATO countries, which was people like America, Britain, France, etc. When we're looking at the Russian, or the East, we look at mainly the Soviet Union, which is modern day Russia. We also look at countries like China, Korea, Vietnam. Vietnam is quite important, actually, and other Eastern European countries, which become satellites of the Soviet Union. So essentially become part of the Soviet Union. This is known as the First World and the Third World. The First World being the First World and the Second World. Sorry, the First World being what we call the West. The Second World, what we call the Russian, the Soviet, the East, and the Third World finally is everybody else. We don't really call it the Third World anymore because it encompasses so much. Most notably, probably, is India, which was notoriously neutral in the Cold War. But to be honest, I mean, they're one of the most capitalist countries out there at the moment. You just go to India and everybody's making money for trying to make money. So, it didn't actually break out into a proper war. Well, when I say proper war, I mean fighting war. For one main reason. These were nuclear bombs. At the start, coincidentally, I forgot to say that we not usually refer to the Cold War as 1945 to 1990, roughly. So, at the start, which is 1945, America had atom bombs, which they demonstrated when they dropped on Japan. Coincidentally, America did help Japan become quite a capitalist country, and Japan became quite a Western country, considering how east it was. So, America had these atom bombs. Russia wanted to be even with America, so they needed atom bombs too. So in 1949 they got their own atom bombs, although that was sort of with help from from spies spying on the Americans. Britain was the third country to get them in 1952, although most people forget about that. Coincidentally, Britain was also the third country to put a satellite into space after the Russians and the Americans. So Britain's always the third country to do everything after the war, that is. Before the war, they were the first country to do everything. So, after the development of nuclear bombs on both sides, it was almost inevitable there wasn't going to be any fighting, because nobody wanted to actually use them because of fear of the other side using them. This was a policy called MAD. It is pretty mad, isn't it? But it's called MAD because MAD's an acronym. Mutually Assured Destruction. If one side used them, the other would use them, so we're not going to use them. Therefore, no fighting actually ever broke out. The main bit of fighting was over one-upmanship, like in the space race, for instance. They tried to demonstrate their superiority. For instance, the Russians, when I say Russians, I mean the East. I mean, I went to Berlin last year. And of course, you're watching this in like several years' time, and it'll be more than last year. But I went to Berlin last year, and we went up the TV tower, and they purposely built it next to the Berlin Wall so the people on the West can see it, and they just went one-upmanship, one-upmanship, one-upmanship. Although I say that, the Cold War very nearly became a very hot war. Very hot, sizzling! Once in the Cuban Missile Crisis, and again in 1983, when America forgot to tell Russia that they were doing some war games, and it looked suspiciously like that they were trying to do a first strike, which it turned out the policy of both of them was not to do the first strike. And if nobody wanted to do the first strike, then no strike will ever happen at all. So we therefore will never actually know what a first strike looked like. Unless you watch the film Doctor Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb. For those of you who haven't seen it, you're all very, very uncultured by the way, I am now going to tell you all about it. Doctor Strangelove is a 1964 comedy starring Peter Sellers, which looks at the possibility of a nuclear war. It follows the story of an American general who goes a little bit mad and decides to declare nuclear war on Russia all by himself by sending his entire bomb wing to bomb Russia. The American president does not approve and attempts to recall the wing. All bar one of the aircraft are recalled. This one goes on to drop its payload on its primary target in Russia. It is later revealed by the Russian ambassador that they have invented a doomsday device, which will make the Earth uninhabitable if any attempt at nuclear war is attempted on Russia. So as you can see, oh, we're in black and white now. I feel all 1960s is cool, isn't it? You know, they should make films in black and white all the time. Anyway, so how did the Cold War end? Because it did come to an end in 1990 is when most historians agree. And the answer is this. The Trabant. The real ones are much bigger, but it's the most terrible car in the world. It handles terribly, it's made of papier-mâché, and they were driven in East Germany, and they're not very nice. But this one's best, because look. And I bought this in Berlin, so it makes it authentic. And people who are with me in Berlin, who I'm sure are watching this video, a shout out to all the people who are with me in Berlin. Anyway, you'd remember that. Anyway, so it was absolutely terrible. That ended the Cold War. It's a bit more difficult than that. I'll explain. What happened was Gorbachev, who was the leader of the Soviet Union in the 1980s, basically started to open up the Soviet Union a bit, because before they were very insular, very isolation policy. But he started to open it up a bit, and things started to come in, and people started to see how terrible life was compared to in the West. They thought, hey, we have really bad things like these stupid Trabant cars. They only had those in East Germany, by the way. They had other things in the likes of Russia. I can't remember what the car they drove in Russia was, but it was definitely not any better than the Trabant. Anyway, so they started to see how terrible life was, and also loads of popular culture came in, like songs, and they thought, hey, we really like this, and then eventually, it started to collapse from the inside out, and the Soviet Union ended up basically ending, and in 1989, the Berlin Wall came down, and coincidentally, the Berlin Wall is right in this very room. Ta-da! Here it is. This is only a bit of it, by the way. But you can see all the graffiti on this side. It's nice, isn't it? Anyway, so this is a piece of the Berlin Wall, and it divided East and West Berlin from 1961 to 1989. And when they started to tear it down, nobody stopped them. And that was basically the end of the Cold War. Although tensions do still carry on. I mean, shout out to Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump. Kim Jong-un's been unwell lately, but apparently he's better. So, get well soon, Kim. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please subscribe and watch more of my videos. And cheerio. Hang on. Do you want more Doctor Strangelove? Well, here it is.
Again, don't know where, don't know